recording? I started. Okay. Please go ahead.
Do you think anyone else is coming in at this point?
If they come, they will come straight in.
So in this place where I live, in Colorado, there are these structures, and this one is a Tibetan stupa, which is very large. And you can see in the background the valley. So this stupa is standing on the mountain here at about 10,000 feet. That's over 3,000 meters. And down the road from it, in the direction of my house, there's a Hindu ashram and temple. And a little bit closer to where I live, there is a Carmelite monastery. And in front of the place where I live, there is this symbol. This morning the mountain is completely covered with cloud, so I can't show you that, but I would like to share with you, in terms of these structures, a possible process of thinking that can lead us into an awareness of those structures that we're speaking about in the integral paradigm. You know, a paradigm is a kind of theoretical framework. And that theoretical framework is based upon, in this case, millennia of explorations and thinking. And a framework like that, however complete it may be, can only be a tool for understanding the reality that it represents. And the reality that it represents is the reality of consciousness and knowledge. And the philosophical question is, how is it that we human beings have consciousness and knowledge at all? That framework, especially the metaphysical aspect of it, attempts to answer that question. But if we just accept the framework as such, then this is a kind of dogmatism. And in the history of philosophy, from Plato, there has been an understanding of the universe, the cosmos, and the human being that is quite complete, and it's known as idealism. And phenomenology is a branch of idealism, which tries to get back to the source of that thinking, to enable us to experience the consciousness that has produced this thinking. So that's a distinction, I think, that we have to start to make between consciousness and what we think about things. At the time of Plato, there arose a school of thought that was oppositional, known as skepticism. And we can see that same pattern repeating itself throughout history. So that this period of time that we are in, this civilization and culture that we belong to, seems to have arisen around the 16th, 17th century. And in 1750, we have Lord Home, David Hume, who takes the position, the traditional position of skepticism with regard to knowledge. And according to him, and just about every main branch of thinking since him, our consciousness is limited by our perception. And everything that we know is known empirically. And this school of thought, this empirical school of thought, which is still dominant in this civilization through science, holds in doubt any kind of absolute understanding. It's fundamentally skeptical, and this kind of thinking tells us that we have in this photographic representation a picture of a wheel of fire that we know exists there in front of us on the screen. But we don't know that wheel of fire actually stands on the lawn in front of my house unless we see it there. And according to Hume, we don't even know that this thing has any substantial reality. We know that it makes impressions, visual impressions, through our sensorium. And on the basis of those impressions, we connect this impression with other similar impressions of either this or something else. And eventually we arrive at a mental notion or idea that there is such a symbol that we have seen, and we can relate it to other things that we have seen, and gradually construct our understanding of things. I think that in the integral paradigm, this is pretty much the way prajnana works. It seems to be a fairly accurate description of that working of the mind. And it has been received very well, and it's a very popular idea. So if we think that this wheel of fire represents the will in Vedic terms, Agni, and the will to be that motivates everything to become what it is, we are projecting a concept which may or may not have some validity. Certainty about that has to be suspended. It's a theoretical proposition that this wheel of fire represents some reality of the human psychology known as the will. And, you know, we can... hello? Somebody,
that was just my computer telling me it's 2 a.m. Sorry.
good morning.
Good morning.
So, for some reason, you're persisting in attending this conference at this ridiculous hour, and even for me, it's quite early in the morning, and I haven't started thinking yet.
Are you doing well?
So I'm recapitulating some ideas that I've been working on the whole year, and that's fairly easy for me to do. But whether it actually becomes something meaningful is another question. We'll see. But anyway, presumably you're motivated to be here, and I can see that you're here. And I assume that there's a fairly strong motivation for you to be here. And so I can perceive by your presence and by my associative thinking that there's a will at work in these human beings to enlarge their awareness of something. So this question of awareness then is the fundamental question. How is it that we're aware of this photographic representation when actually the only thing that's really happening physically is that some photons are striking our visual receptors? And so Hume's idea seems plausible that something called the mind is organizing this perception according to its other experiences and associations, and somehow knows that it is a visual representation of an idea that it has arrived at by a process of experiencing various demonstrations of the will. And then we read the Vedas and we read psychology, and we all agree that there is this ability of the human being to focus its will in deliberate ways and achieve results through its actions. So there's an energy in our consciousness that can be focused towards manipulating the world around us and to some extent the world inside us. But the idea that this will has some substantial reality, that we can say there is a will in the human being to conquer nature and construct comfortable conditions for living and achieve something like harmony and justice in society. You know, to say that there is such a will is quite a speculative, theoretical statement. All we really know is that people do certain things, and have the actions that we take have results that are more or less anticipated by us and desired by us. And so Hume will define consciousness on three levels: perception, emotion, and ideas. And for him, that is a description of consciousness. How there happens to exist such a structure, and that it is embodied throughout our species, probably can't be known by empirical observation. Science is certainly trying to relate this whole process to brain phenomena. And the question that's being asked all the time by researchers is, how does the brain produce consciousness? So this is the theory of consciousness and knowledge that has been prevalent for a few hundred years. And how do we move from this position, this sort of empirical, skeptical position, into a more comprehensive notion of what our consciousness actually is. And when we ask what is consciousness, then we enter into another domain of thinking, because consciousness is this awareness of phenomena. And the awareness of phenomena is different from sensation and emotion and ideas. It is actually somehow holding in it experience that is meaningful. So this meaningful experience that we hold in our consciousness has to be explained, has to be understood, has to be known as what it is in itself. Not what it is according to this system of philosophy or that system of philosophy, but what is this phenomenon of consciousness, phenomenal awareness, that is the dominant feature of our lives, and what is its relationship to the world around us. So I think that in the development of Western philosophy, after Hume and Kant, there was a development in thinking that is focusing more on this question of awareness. And in Hegel's book, which is titled The Phenomenology of Spirit or The Phenomenology of Mind, begins with the heading consciousness. And so there's a focus, there's a shift in focus. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, there seems to be a developmental progression within this framework that we're concentrating on, from more of a focus on the process of prajnana to focusing on the process of samjnana, a more synthetic type of consciousness, comes into the awareness of philosophers and becomes a primary focus, as opposed to the empirical sensorium and what information it can give us. So how does that actually happen? I'm going to attempt to guide us through a process of thinking that might contribute to our more integral experience and knowledge of what consciousness actually is, and eventually allow us to perceive, to be aware of consciousness itself, to move out of this theoretical framework into a much larger field of universal phenomena. So in yoga, you know, Sri Aurobindo is constantly recalling the importance of universalizing our consciousness, moving out of our immediate sensorium and our immediate impressions and our theories, and expanding our consciousness to include the world and the cosmos and the fundamental principles that are up in operation in reality. And so that's a movement back towards idealism. So in the experiential field here, for example, there's a kind of phenomenological methodology that we can apply to come into more close contact in our awareness with some things that actually are happening and have value. First of all, if we visit these structures visually, what we see, I will assume that this is what we see. You can certainly question it, but what we see, I believe, are objects. We're aware of objects, and not just photographic representations of objects, but if we're here and we're actually walking up and down the road and driving and being here, we actually see these structures, and they are symbolic. So we see that this is a spire on top of a stupa. And we might, if we're a little bit aware of Buddhist symbology, we might think that the conical progression of the spire with its parallel lines, I mean, that's what we see. But we might think that that object represents something. Perhaps it represents levels of progression from lower to higher. Perhaps the fact that it's gold represents that it has a lot of value for some people. And if we walk around to the other side of it, we'll see that there's a box, and this is quite high above our height when we're standing in front of it. It's maybe 100 feet high, 150 feet. But there's a golden box with a sculpted image of a person's head in it. And that person is known as the Karmapa in Buddhism. So we can see this image at the top, almost at the top of this structure, looking out over that valley. And if we know a little bit about Buddhism, this particular school of Buddhism, then that ball at the top of the spire represents something that they call the eye of the universe. And it sees 50 miles or so, I don't know, at least 50 miles in every direction, except behind, where there's a mountain. And the most important thing about this experience, if we're standing there, is that we feel a radiance. It's like a subtle atmosphere that emanates from this building. And just about anybody who sits there for a while and has some kind of inner ability can feel that. You don't need to know anything about Tibetan Buddhism, but if you're just capable of some stillness and awareness of the atmosphere around, you'll experience a number of things, the air, the wind, and the sunlight, and the cold, and so on, but you will also experience another vibrational field that is present around this structure. I have tried this with a lot of people, and I know that people have this experience. So it's when we're in front of this building, this structure, we're experiencing through sight and hearing and thinking and perhaps if we know a little bit about the tradition through language, through speech, and also through our molecular structures, physically, we're experiencing something that is elevating. We feel that we are identifying our immediate awareness with much more than a visual object. That's our first impression. But little by little, within a fairly short period of time, we become aware of a field of impressions that affects us emotionally and psychologically and spiritually. So that becomes then an object of consciousness that exceeds anything that we can easily describe in terms of empirical knowledge. We have knowledge, we have an awareness of something that has meaning, but it's quite outside of our conventional object-oriented awareness.
Is that not sorry?
Go ahead.
Is that not though only if it's the first time? Because if you've had other experiences which might have give you similar feelings and expressions and internal feelings.
That's exactly what I'm going to go now into some similar ones. So if we pass down the road a ways and go to the Hindu temple, we discover that inside this, under that major dome, there's a hall, a large hall, and in that hall there's a white marble statue of a goddess. She has the name Lakshmi. And every day the monks in the ashram put saris on this goddess and put flowers around her, and they sing devotional songs. And if we go there in the evening and concentrate ourselves, sit quietly and observe the experience that we're having, we find that we at some point are somewhat transported in our consciousness to a feeling of delight. And there's a kind of energy of delight that is generated in this space. And it's not the music, and it's not the statue, and it's not confined to the names of the goddess that are being chanted, but it's an actual energy of delight that we feel. And this is a fairly common phenomenon in Hinduism. It's why they have this temple, and it's why they chant these songs to the mother, because they know that they're going to generate this atmosphere of delight, and that it is quite pervasive. If you have a little bit of patience, and if you're somewhat knowledgeable of the tradition, then you become conscious of something that could be called a divine presence. And so then you can make some comparisons between these two. Obviously, they represent a kind of let's call it religious orientation or awareness that is away from the ordinary, everyday, practical experience of life. And in fact, when we study these traditions, we know that that's exactly their purpose, to elevate human consciousness above the practical, everyday world of experience, and if possible, to lead the human being towards a state of mind that is free from suffering, free from ignorance, beyond the ordinary spectrum of human knowledge and thought and belief about reality, to elevate consciousness to another level than the ordinary everyday consciousness. And knowing that from scriptures and teachings, we can come to the conclusion that these spires on the top of these structures actually represent an elevation of consciousness that's possible to the human being. If we go down to this chapel, which also has a kind of spire on the top and a bell, and inside it, it has a sculpture of Jesus Christ, almost life-sized, iron, wrought iron sculpture on the wall, and some very nice stained glass depictions of campesinos, workers, climbing the terrain from the desert up the hill with their bags of grain. And so on one wall, we have a depiction of the life itself, an ordinary life of workers. And then we have this sculpture of Christ on the cross, which we know symbolizes sacrifice and redemption and a release of some kind from the burdens of life. And so in each of these cases, there is this idea that we receive from teachers and that we actually experience when we relate ourselves to these traditions. This idea of sacrifice, of giving up one type of experience for the sake of another type of experience. And Hegel, in his philosophy, concentrates on this to quite a large extent in the phenomenology of spirit and in the philosophy of religion. He points out with substantial arguments and descriptions the phenomenon of faith and devotion in religion that generates in the human being a kind of blissful energy and a feeling of expansion beyond ordinary human experience into a universal, an awareness of universal transcendence. And he points out that if we compare objects like these three, we see differences in the shapes of the spires and the shapes of the buildings, and we understand differences in the doctrines. But out of those differences, we are also able to perceive a unity. And that unity of devotion and transcendence, which is experiential, it's emotional and it's ideational, constitutes an immediate awareness, a phenomenal awareness of an object known as the freedom of the spirit. The human spirit feels liberated when it experiences this kind of devotion and focus of its energy. So that wheel of fire that is the will in the human being, according to the Veda, is a will, according to the Veda, it's a will to transcend limitations and identify consciousness with something that is universal. And in this case, what is universal about these symbols and these practices is this energy of feeling that throughout history and time and space right now on the earth, there are expressions of an elevated spirit. And it's not just happening in this building or that building or the other building or this tradition or that tradition. This experience of the elevation of the human spirit with respect to that feeling itself, that kind of religious aspiration and devotion towards freedom and liberation from the everyday, is a universal human form of behavior. And then he points out that in becoming aware of that ourselves, in feeling that and becoming aware of it, our consciousness becomes universal. We become aware of that energy and that feeling and that sense of liberation in a way that we are identified with it as a universal human event. Consciousness becomes aware of a universal quality of existence. And in becoming aware of that, it also becomes aware of itself. It is consciousness, and it is consciousness of an object that is universal. Now, we could make the same kind of comparison with hospitals all over the world where medical practitioners are performing services in order to restore health to people. We can perceive, we can be conscious of the will towards health and well-being manifesting in hospitals all over the world right now at this moment. And when we become aware of that, we are concentrating consciousness, our consciousness, on a plane of universal qualities that are quite other than the qualities that our conventional sensorial experience gives us. But we can practice the elevation and expansion of consciousness quite deliberately and become aware of ideal presences, the ideal of health manifesting throughout the human spectrum of behavior, the ideal of a kind of freedom from suffering by knowing directly this delight that is experienced through especially Eastern traditions. And eventually, he says, we can become aware, consciousness can be focused on the object of the divine delight or the will to heal or justice in the legal system, for example, but beyond the legal system, the ideal of justice that is pervading the efforts of beings everywhere all the time, to make possible the well-being of everyone by adjusting social relations. And then Hegel comes to the conclusion that when consciousness is dwelling in these universals, and they are ideals, it has progressed by a process of what some phenomenologists would call difference or negation. It has negated the perception of the cross and the Christ hanging on it, and the chanting to the Divine Mother, in its becoming aware of that spirit, and in its awareness of that spirit manifesting in innumerable instances throughout time and space, it has negated also its own immediate experience and identified with a universal reality. And then he reaches this quite remarkable conclusion that consciousness of that universality is that universality. That there is no difference between that universality of the divine spirit or the ideal of justice and health than the consciousness of it, because that universal spirit is not confined to any of its particular manifestations. It is there in all of those manifestations to some extent, but it is also there in itself. And where it resides in itself is in consciousness. So then Hegel describes this elevation of consciousness to the level of universals as a kind of ultimate possibility of the human being, and he negates or transcends that also, and arrives at the consciousness of the absolute spirit, which is the consciousness and also force of health and truth and justice, and that he says is an energy that's manifesting in all of these practices, all of these behaviors, all of these symbolic structures, but it itself is a reality much vaster and in fact absolute of all of these expressions. And in that process of thinking, he has identified consciousness with the infinite and the absolute, which is a move in phenomenology that brings consciousness in front of or in identification with universal principles. Consciousness is those principles. Those principles are what consciousness is. And the human beings, the sensorium and the evolutionary structures of that we normally identify with are just physical, vital, mental formations of that universal spirit. It is there in all of them. And it is also beyond all of them. And so we come to this kind of Brahmanic view through a process of reflection and direct experience. And then if we refer all of this to some lines of Savitri, Sri Aurobindo says in the first canto of Book 2, he describes an experience. He says, there, walled apart by its own innerness, in a mystical barrage of dynamic light, he saw a lone, immense, high-curved world pile. erect like a mountain chariot of the gods, motionless under an inscrutable sky. Infinity calls to it as it dreams and climbs. Its spire touches the apex of the world. Acting upon this visible nature's scheme, it wakens our earth matter's heavy dose to think and feel and to react to joy.
Does that make sense?
It, that is to say, this inner spiral world of planes, models in us our diviner parts, lifts mortal mind into a greater air, makes yearn this life of flesh to intangible aims, links the body's death with immortality's call, and he describes it as being within, without, above, and below. It is a subtle inner structure of being, and it's all the 7 planes that we hear in the commentaries on the Rig Veda, but they are 7 planes of one being that is everything, and its structure constitutes the inner structure of at least human consciousness, but then we also know that it constitutes, in this view, the structure of everything. And then he says, if Earth were all, and he means the material sphere, and this structure were not in her, thought could not be, nor life delight's response. So, you know, the life delight's response we can relate to the sensorium, and thought we can relate to ideas and concepts. But our physical, vital, and mental structures and our conceptual structures, according to this view, are led to those transcendent experiences because that is the fundamental structure of existence. And these domes and spires that human beings are creating, and these practices that lead us out of the ordinary into transcendental universal experiences, are not just constructs of the evolving human society and culture, but they are in fact expressions of a universal spiritual self that is absolute. So this idea of Sri Aurobindo suddenly jumps out at us as an inner explanation of all of those forms and structures and behaviors that we just reviewed from a more external phenomenal standpoint. They are appearances, and through those various appearances, we also have experiences that we associate with them. And then we find out that this is actually the fundamental structure of existence. So then in the Upanishad, we read these lines in Sri Aurobindo's commentary. Avidya is the ignorance. That means that none of these structures really know their own purposes, and they are just in a kind of energetic temporal relationship with each other, and that's actually how we usually perceive them. And so this state of ignorance, he says, is the cause of mortality. If it is the cause of mortality, it is also the path out of mortality. So by approaching all of these structures from our ignorant standpoint, we eventually arrive at an awareness of something which is immortal, the immortal spirit or the ideal realm that is manifesting through all of these structures. But we have to go through this often painful or at least fragmented developmental process in order to get to the awareness of that infinite which is beyond. And he says the limitation of mortal mind and life and body has been created precisely in order that the individual may affirm himself against the flux of Prakriti, against all of these changing processes and structures and forms and behaviors and thoughts. Against all of that, as Hegel says, we elevate ourselves by a kind of negation or differentiation among all of the various aspects to grasp a unity and an infinity that is itself the truth of all of these things. And none of the individual temporal expressions are that, and yet it is the essence of all of them. In order, says Sri Aurobindo, eventually to transcend, to possess and transform it. And the transformation of it, that is to say, the ignorance, is a transformation of consciousness in us. We begin to experience it differently. We experience all the expressions in time and space, all the forces and energies of expression as expressions of something which is infinitely beyond them always and is itself the absolute of being. This self-enlargement, he says, has then to awaken to the perception of something exceeding itself, exceeding the personal manifestation. So if we actually perceive something that exceeds our own immediate experience and also our life as a personal manifestation, then we are using life to experience something which is not life, which is immortal. Then his conclusion is, man has so to enlarge his conception of self as to see all in himself and himself in all. And that would refer back to those lines of Savitri in which the self is actually that cosmic hierarchy. It is perceiving in us itself in everything. And it is perceiving in everything itself in us. And that, he says, is consciousness. Consciousness has an ontological existence. And it's not what we think, and it's not what we feel, and it's not what we perceive. But all of our perceptions and feelings and thoughts are temporal expressions of it, as are all of our larger movements in society and culture, which are all happening and have always been happening for the sake of the human being's sacrifice, that is to say, we burn energy through all of these forms, in order to realize something which is not burnable. It's like the fire of Agni is there in order to show us that its origin and its true self is inexhaustible. And when we come to that conclusion, the quality of life for us shifts. We live differently when we see that reality, when it becomes not just an idea or a symbol, but when we actually experience reality like that, then reality itself takes on another meaning and value. So ultimately, I've come to the conclusion that there has been a kind of progression in thinking since the 17th, 18th century, very systematically, year by year, century by century, that enables us to finally be able to appreciate what the Vedic paradigm actually represents. And by bracketing, in the phenomenological sense, the paradigm per se, and re-evaluating experience itself, we come to an understanding of that paradigm that is experiential and not just theoretical. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Right. Yeah, thanks. This is about Brahman, basically. It's Ken Upanishad in a pure sense, in a way what you were describing, that all the activities which we can perceive from the highest, conceive from the highest and perceive from the lowest, will be the activities of this consciousness. And from the ideal realms to the perception of our immediate objects of sense will be the activities of this consciousness alone. That's why we cannot perceive their consciousness, but we can perceive everything else which this consciousness perceives. That means the being, yes? The consciousness is preoccupied with being these images of things. I would like to come back to these images of things, which we already saw, because I thought it's a good place to see it, that consciousness produces.
Excuse me for a minute.
Yeah, produces those images, and we perceive them. We see the world as consciousness sees it. Yes. We created, so to say, these images. We see computer, ourselves, in the particular way. Though these are the what do you call them? Photons, striking our atoms within ourselves. We are the bunch of atoms attacked by photons, and something is happening. It's not just bunch of photons attacking the electrons of our atoms within ourselves. It is something altogether different. Our world is different. It has stars, sky. We see ourselves in the mirror. We can think, we can create poetry. We have a sense of beauty, and so on and so forth. So what are these images produced by consciousness from being, from one infinite being? All these particularities and all these varieties, diversities of things, colors, shapes. And this is it really valuable? Is it really true? Yes, it is. It is the only way how we can perceive the being. And our discussion led me to a very interesting thing, that the presumption that we have to come in contact with the being is a false presumption. We cannot come into contact with the being directly, because we are the being. What we can do, we can perceive this being in our consciousness on whatever level, from the highest to the lowest, or altogether. And this perception of it, or this conception of it, or this action of consciousness upon it, yes, the sense of the object of sense, is the only thing how we can touch it or come into contact with it. So consciousness remains really fundamentally ontological reality. That means it is, and it does to us produces for us this world which we perceive. And this created world of images is real as the world itself is real. So this kind of question, what is more real, the image or the world, is, truly speaking, irrelevant. And it's an interesting thought. I never had it. I always struggled with this, reality and consciousness as something, as the image of thing as something not real. But truly speaking, we do not know other reality, and only that which consciousness will present to us. According to what Rod was today beautifully described, how we perceive something beyond the images. There is a reality of consciousness, this Hegelian view on the spirit. Beautiful. Kind of climbed the ladder up and up and up, and then you can really perceive that there is such a reality. And it is tangible, and it is conceivable to us. We can comprehend of it. Well, it's a reflection. Sorry to take away this. After listening, it's like a meditation listening for me. I fall into trance in a way. By the way, Rod has this kind of effect on me. I'm falling into this kind of state.
Yes.
Yes?
I agree. It was a beautiful journey.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. It was so rich that my mind is sort of trying to sort through the many different aspects of that. And I'm sort of going to the beginning of all the images. And the one thing that struck me right at the beginning, just to stay with one image for a moment, is that the stupa is, and I've seen stupas in Nepal, the closest one in Kathmandu. I'm always amazed that there's nothing in there. You don't go into a stupa. It's purely symbolic. And I was sort of looking at the stupa, and it has these 5 little squares at the bottom, then 4, then 3, then 1, and then 1 as the unity on top of that. So the stupa is purely symbolic. All the other ones you can actually go inside, but in the Tibetan one there is no inside. The inside is the world. You know, the sky is the roof. Sort of thing. That was sort of my first strong impression about all these things. And then on it went to this journey on consciousness.
Well, this goddess is actually inside.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You walk a little ways down the road, and you come to the inside space, the sanctuary where the Lama teaches. So it does have an inside.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't put the stupa on top of the inside. The inside is beside it. But what the Lama is saying is this: rest in the unbounded spaciousness, infinite awareness, and the warmth of the love of the Divine Mother, feeling love radiating from your heart. And the Lama is chanting that in Tibetan, and the American disciples are chanting it in English. So they're saying, "O Mother of all the Buddhas of the 3 times, you who are the most powerful among all the protectors of our world, Supreme Mother, O Sipa Gyalmo, Queen of the world, da 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 da." And he's chanting in Tibetan, but then something happens.
It's 3 hours.
And one is filled, literally filled and expanded into the unbounded spaciousness of being, and it's an experience. And so that radiance which one feels around the stupa is the product of 1,000 years of these practices that actually do achieve an experiential elevation of consciousness.
Hmm.
And that consciousness knows that directly. And there are no more images at that point.
That was indeed a fascinating other thing for me to hear about the sort of almost magic or mystical experience by being close to certain structures. We have that here in Australia with the Uluru, for example, also called as AS Rock. People go there and there must be something very, very magic about it. Or they're right in the countryside somewhere, particular rock formations where Aboriginals go just to be in this kind of field. And even Westerners, as you call it, when they're open to it, when they can get lost in this kind of state, they can feel it. It's just magic.
India is well known for those phenomena.
Yeah.
The yogis will associate themselves with a stone or a cave or a mountain or something for a lifetime, and it becomes an energy field that anybody can feel.
Hmm.
Now, when I create that image with words, I think we have a chance to see what the real value of language is. Language is capable of creating images constantly and infinitely. But then language is just one of the faculties. And the images that it creates are just tools. They're representations. But then there are realities other than representational.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think what I really appreciated as well was how you linked, and by joining all these different experiences in these different places, you were finding commonality with all religions, philosophies. It's wherever the one thing in common is this experience of feeling something in an internal spiritual sense, a consciousness that's deeper than your physical senses will give you.
Good. Because it's all one, actually.
And what I was really coming back to what you were just saying too, in a sense, is the poverty of empiricism that only compares everything with something else. This is more than that, and this is higher than that. And instead of saying, well, everything is by itself valuable. And I think one of the big mistakes that we're making in society is comparing ourselves, comparing everything. And that's also a big part of our ecological problems, because we want to be richer and more powerful and everything more. It's,
yeah,
this coming back to idealism, I think, I think that's really it's that paradigm shift that we all need to undergo, I guess.
That's the main point. The reality of things has to be respected, and not just our convenient constructs. And this requires a major shift in the human behavioral pattern. We have to recover something on a higher level that was already present long before the empirical mind developed. So it's a cycle, it's kind of a spiral of evolution, and we come back to a more intuitive and holistic grasp of things after this period of fragmentation and analysis.
Mm. Yeah. Hmm.
So how do you describe, or how do you define idealism then, Rod?
Idealism?
Yes.
Idealism is fundamentally a view that reality is a spiritual essentially a spiritual phenomenon, event that is expressed through temporal forms, and those spiritual entities. Whitehead calls them eternal entities. Those spiritual entities are substantial. They exist ontologically. They are eternal, infinite, ever-present powers of being. And the world that we perceive is the lower hemisphere of those realities expressing through time and space. I think that's the meaning of idealism. So Plato said that the good, ideia tu agathou, the idea of the good, empowers things to be what they are, and it also empowers consciousness to know them. That's the definition of the good. And so the good is an ideal. He also defines it as the sun, a kind of sun that illumines things the way that the physical sun illumines the earth. But it's an ever-present, eternal sun. And if the human beings could climb out of their cave of illusions, they would initially be blinded by that reality, but eventually might adapt to it.
Nice metaphor, nice image.
So it's like, I think it's very similar to the idea of Surya Savitri in the Veda. It's an origin, a spiritual origin of things which is ever present. And so the philosopher, cultural psychologist Gebser speaks of the ever-present origin.
Mm-hmm.
And he's taking that straight from Heidegger and Heidegger's commentary on the pre-Socratics. And Gebser, by that thinking, was also able to project something called the integral consciousness as a next step in evolution.
Can you say a bit more about what you said about the good before? I'm sort of resonating to, I think it's the second verse of the Taoism, the Tao Te Ching, where it says, that it's only when we believe in the good of the good that we, in a sense, also create the ungood, the bad sort of scenario. And that sort of, I guess, I mean, they obviously have a lot about duality, that sort of creation of duality consciousness. So, or, only because we emphasize love so much, we create hate and then get stuck in it. So, and for me as a therapist, that is very important to sort of go beyond that, because we're constantly dealing with the hate and the envy and the fear and that sort of stuff, which is all born about duality consciousness in a sense, or because we didn't allow frustration in the first place, and then we get stuck with it for the rest of our lives, sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, the question that you're asking is the whole question. That's the question of existence. And how do we reconcile the suffering and the falsehood and the fragmentation with this urge to be of the whole, and for that whole to be fulfilling of all of its parts? So the idealists will say that we have those urges because that whole already exists. And as we just heard from Sri Aurobindo, the fragmentation and the suffering are there to make us aware of the whole.
Yeah.
And so the Buddhists also, they're just sophisticated Hindus. In that thing that I was reading a while ago, they say, dwell in the spaciousness and the stillness, and allow the Divine Mother to absorb all the poisons. And the poisons are things like anger and fear and jealousy and desire. And when the Divine Mother has absorbed all of those poisons and you're in the spaciousness, then you know the good. And so you always, the good was always there, pulling you out of your entanglements. And if you make that a deliberate action, then you can easily achieve it. That's the simple Buddhist teaching.
Or was it the bad that was actually taking you to the good?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and if you read Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Isha Upanishad, it's amazing that, in almost every paragraph he says that the bad is there for a purpose. The ignorance, the multiplicity, the dying, the death, they're all there for the sake of their opposites.
Yeah, that's right.
I also want to say that in Jainism, similar to Buddhism, it's also seen as a process. And they speak of samajnana. This means the right way of thinking, the right way of intention, the right way of action. So it's all in a process. So it's not like some abstract thing, but you create it yourself by wanting it and believing it, so to say.
Rod, can you stop this sharing? Then we will see everybody's picture. If you stop sharing, you don't have any more projection. Yes, then it's better than we see everyone on one page.
I wasn't aware of the need to do that.
Right.
Should have told me sooner. Funny that whenever you make a sound, your face comes forward. And then when you're silent, you disappear. Ladislav, what are you thinking? What are you thinking there with your head on your hand?
No, we are all absorbed in what we do, no? And we take it from that part, all that comes on us. And naturally, you see the common points. And it's very interesting. Thank you very much. I liked very much this kind of...
I think we had a good idea when we were doing our seminars by saying that it's an exploration.
Yes.
Nothing is finished, and nothing is known.
Yeah, because it is huge. The field is huge, and there is this impossibility to gather everything in the one moment, no? Especially when we talk. If we could only vibrate, maybe it would be possible.
We can just vibrate. But then those around us will think we're a bit crazy.
No, I mean, in a kind of meaningful way that we would also understand what we are vibrating about.
Yeah, right.
Start talking.
You vibrate with beauty and truth. Everybody will understand.
So, what are you doing next? Next week?
I think it's you that's doing one next
What are we doing next week?
No, what are you doing next week?
Well,
I'm not doing anything.
okay. Then who would like to make a kind of presentation? Lazo, would you like to take up next week? So we will take everyone thoughts, some deeper thoughts, some kind of essential central ideas of everyone on this topic to come to this kind of discussion on the faculties of consciousness and integral paradigm of knowledge. So would you like to take Lazo next time?
Okay.
Okay. You will present your view on things, what is burning in you, what you are interested in, what is driving you in this, and then we will take next. Huh? Then
This
Richard,
would be
Werner, and Gunhild would be nice if you.
Sure, yeah. I can do something in a fortnight or something. Or
So
how close are we going to Christmas?
no problem. We can go over Christmas and so on endlessly.
I'm doing a workshop from the 20th to the 24th, and the 20th happens to be Sunday, so I can be present throughout the month on Saturday.
okay. Me too.
24th, I have a language with music.
Right. All right. So then next time you'll also take over, and then just for everyone to keep in mind that you will be also making some presentations. What would you like to share with others on this topic? Would be very interesting. I am sure there is much to say, but yeah, something very personal, very intimate to you, to your seeking of the spiritual experience or knowledge in the higher sense would be very appreciated. I think this is what we are here for. And then maybe after first round we will see what we will do, yes, what material we have and how we can deal with it further. Right. All right, then thank you very much for this very beautiful session, and we will meet next time. Then I stop recording. Next time, Lazo will be presenting on music and the spirit, Vedic approach to music. Beautiful.
Very good. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.